happens to us after we die? Some people here have died. That is, they have been pronounced clinically dead. They have experienced heaven or hell, and yet here they are in the studio to tell us about it. Trudy Isles was in a hospital in New York 27 years ago. She had meningitis, and in fact, the doctor said she was dying. They rang her husband, told him to come at once to her bedside. When he arrived, she was dead, and yet you remember that moment, Trudy, don't you? Describe it to us.
Very clearly. I was in bed and in isolation and very unconscious, but wasn't aware of that, obviously, and suddenly found myself coming out of my body and coming to be still just underneath the ceiling and looking down in amazement at this form with all the tubes coming out of it. I suddenly saw Chris coming in through the door in great rush and looking at me with a terrified look on his face. He came around the side of the bed, he let the side down, he pulled a little chair up and lay across my arm, which was on a board with tubes, and sobbed silently into my tummy. And I was devastated, whatever I is now.
You saw this from above, as if you were suspended.
Yes, I just saw the form of me, but I was no longer there. And I saw outside the window our children, who were 1 and 3, and who were being brought every day by a friend. 27 years ago, they weren't allowed into the hospital. And I saw them there, small and totally vulnerable, and I heard a voice inside say, "Who will take care of them?" But I, meanwhile, was in a state of bliss.
You were happy?
Totally free of everything.
No pain, no feeling of illness?
A sense of complete oneness, peace that I've longed for ever since, but I now know that it can only be found when we've left our body.
Were you religious at the time, Trudy?
No, I've always been a seeker. And since that experience, since discovering that there were 2 of me, I've focused the last 27 years entirely on a spiritual
You mean body and
aspect
soul?
of life.
You mean the 2 of you because you separated from your body? Is that what you mean?
Mm.
Now, obviously, you've checked these facts with your husband, with your children. Are they accurate? Did he do that?
Yes. I didn't say anything to him. Oh, the next thing, I was suddenly flung back into my body and was in a lot of pain and procedures being done. And there I was. And about 2 weeks later, came home in a wheelchair. But it changed me forever. I didn't tell anyone, and I didn't tell him.
Why?
I thought he'd think I was mad, or it was an illusion, and amongst all my many illusions, that's never been one. I know it to be. And it was a year later, we were having dinner together one night and talking about deep things, and it felt right, and I said, "I want to tell you something that happened a year ago." And I described to him in detail, and he went pale and said, "But it isn't possible." And I said, "It's okay if you don't think it's possible, I'm just telling you what I saw." "What happened?" He said, "I rushed in, I came around the side of the bed, I let the side down, you were gone. I pulled the chair up and I leant over and put my head into your tummy and sobbed, and for the first time in my life I prayed, 'Please no, not now, don't take her.'"
Terribly moving story. It's an absolutely extraordinary story, Trudy. When you recovered, the doctors, did they say to you that they believed you had died?
I was right at the edge. They were not getting any responses. I was in a very deep coma.
So were they as amazed as we are listening to you when you came round?
Yes, but it's just part of medical procedures, and this wasn't shared.
So you never told them of this
Oh, no.
experience because you thought they'd think you were mad. Can I ask our audience here, listening to that story, do you think that Trudy had an illusion? Do you think she was mad? So what do you feel about this?
I think what I can see from it is that this is the sort of body's way of shutting down, and it's a perfectly natural thing, and people have experiences in the same way that I might have a dream.
So you don't believe this?
No, I don't.
But you don't think she's mad?
No, not at all. No. In fact, my late father had an experience of near death.
Yes.
After open heart surgery, and he experienced a lot of the classic symptoms of a tunnel and light. But he didn't see that as necessarily having seen the other side or anything like that. But
Trudy saw her husband coming in. She saw what was happening. And she saw it from a position suspended high by the ceiling, not from the bed, but from...
Because we're experiencing here an out-of-body experience as well as a near-death experience. So we've got quite a wide range of things to discuss. But
yes, hold on a second. Sir?
You're using the word saw as if it's through the eyes.
Yeah.
The human brain can receive information so many different ways. Just because Trudy is a name, saw in her mind this, doesn't mean her eyes were focusing, or just some sensory experience of her husband coming in,
but are you
which she has then logically put into this floating above the body and watching it with her eyes, because that's the only language she understands.
But I find that just as difficult to believe, that you're saying that Trudy saw all this even though her eyes were shut.
Esther, can I tell you something?
Yes, ma'am.
I had a near-death experience, and I didn't believe I was going to die. In fact, my people around me were telling me, keep quiet, keep quiet. I said, don't worry, don't panic, I'm quite all right. And all I knew, all of a sudden, I was up above, looking at myself, and the blood pouring out like anything.
Why? What had happened to you?
I had a hemorrhage, and I didn't know I was hemorrhaging. It was the shock of my parents' death that caused the hemorrhage.
Yes.
And I didn't know anything about it at all. I didn't expect to have a hemorrhage. I didn't know what happens when a hemorrhage happens. And what do people do? I don't know any procedures.
Do you believe you had died, or that you were just in a coma, or you were just very ill?
I think I was in the border of dying, and all of a sudden I decided not to die and come back. I think that's how I
So it was a conscious sort of decision. Trudy, do you feel that you were near death and you made a conscious decision, or do you think there was a power outside you at work?
I feel whatever it is that left the body, that sees, as that gentleman over there used the word seeing, it's impossibly difficult to explain. It's something to do with the universal energy that creates everything. And it was the seeing bit that became separate from the matter bit.
But you feel there was a very clear division. And let me ask Dr. Steve Donnelly, now, can you explain this in a sort of scientific way?
I think the first point I'd like to address is that however skeptical one might be about the sort of the objective reality of people's experiences, I think one thing nobody can deny is the life-changing significance that these kinds of experiences have for the people who experience them. That doesn't, though, testify to their objective reality. And I think I've got to agree with the speaker over here. There are other circumstances in which people have these kinds of experiences.
So you don't think this was a spiritual experience, you think this was a physical?
Depends what you mean by spirit. I think it was spiritual in a subjective sense to Trudy experiencing it.
But how can you explain?
Similar experiences happen to people, for instance, who undergo various types of drug experiences. They too can experience tunnels and lights. Out of the body experience, this feeling of looking down happens in lots of other circumstances.
Like what?
Oh, meditation, when people put themselves into particular sort of altered mode of consciousness.
But come on,
people
Steve,
can have
Trudy
this experience.
Was up by the ceiling, she looked down at her own body, she saw the tubes, she saw her husband coming in.
I think we could look at it a different way.
Dr. Fenwick.
We've looked at a number of these experiences. And
as a researcher?
As a researcher.
Yes.
And we find that a proportion of people do go up to the ceiling, and some people then find a tunnel appears actually in the ceiling, and they go down the tunnel. Other people stay on the ceiling and go back. Now, the really interesting question, and this is what the studio audience seems to be going for, is can you get information on the ceiling that you couldn't have got if you were in your body? Now, this is the $64,000 question.